I'm not here in the shop, I'm here at home once again, and I wanted to offer a really fun lesson, a tutorial to go along with this pattern. This pattern is called Simple Fingerless Mitts that Sarah Heckman wrote. She created this pattern. She's the owner of Apricot Yarn and Supply, and we're gonna go through it step by step. It's a wonderful pattern if you are new to knitting, if you're just learning. It's really a fun first project if you know how to do the knit stitch. It's also a really good pattern if you've been away from knitting for a while and you want to kind of get your feet wet and just kind of slowly dust off those skills. So what we're going to create are these really fun little mitts that look like this. I made mine with UU woolly worsted in this really nice olive color. They're a really good, useful item, I think. They're really great if you have people on your Christmas list who are walkers, who like to ride bikes. It's a nice way to keep your hands warm if you're going on a morning ride. It really is a wonderful Christmas gift. They're a great item to have, even shoved in your purse for when you need them. What you're going to need is the pattern. I have needles that are size US 8, and I have a ball of worsted weight. This is woolly worsted UU yarn. This is 100% washable wool. It's a wonderful wool to work with, whether you're new or whether you're experienced. It creates a really beautiful garter stitch fabric. So what we're gonna do today is we're gonna cast on, and you're basically just going to make this garter stitch rectangle. And then at the end, we're going to bring it around and you're going to seam it, leave a space for your thumb to go through, and then seam up the rest. So it's a really easy project and we're going to do it together. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So first we're going to go ahead and we're going to take our yarn. This is already in a ball, so it's ready to go. And let's take a look and see how many stitches we need to cast on. Okay, so it looks like we need to cast on 25 stitches first. So for this project, we're going to leave a nice long tail, maybe a little bit longer than, I don't know, 12 to 14 inches, because that tail we're going to use to seam up the edge. So first we want to make a slip knot. So here's a slip knot. I'm putting it through. And you might know a different way to cast on. We're gonna do the simple around the thumb method like that. This is the way I teach in my Learn to Knit class, my beginning knitting class. So we're going to cast on 25 stitches. Remember, we have the tail, and then we have the working yarn, the yarn that's connected to our ball. The working yarn is what we want to work with right now, okay? So I usually have it kind of around my fingers like that, and then I kind of grab it like that, like in a fist. And then I bring it around my thumb until I see that little X right there. And then I put the tip of the needle through the X until I have another stitch on my needle. Now I've got 3. So the first one that we do with the slip knot, that's considered a stitch 2, so now I have 3. 4, 5, don't do it too tightly, okay? 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We want to be able to slip it really nice and loosely on our needle, so don't do it so tightly that it's hard to move, okay? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. Okay, Now, the first thing we do when we're ready to knit is we line up all of those little nubs, I call them, those little knots, the little twists in the yarn. We line them all up on the right side of the needle, okay? We have our tail coming from the bottom and our working yarn is coming from the top. Now we're ready to put our needle into that first stitch like this until it looks like an X. We loop it around the back. I usually lock it down a little bit with my finger. And then we go under that stitch so it looks like a T and off the top. Okay, I'm going to just show you a little bit slower that I'm going into the stitch and I make an X kind of formation. And make sure you're holding on to the working yarn that goes around the back side. And then this guy goes to the front now. And I hold on to that stitch so we don't lose anything. And I'm dipping this nose underneath that stitch and then pulling it off the top. I make sure all these little guys are all lined up on the right side again. So I'm going in, around, and under, and pop it off the top. In there and around and off at the top. All right, let me go ahead and finish the row and I'll show you what we do when we get to the bottom and we have an empty needle. So now that we have that first row all finished, I want to kind of remind you that with this particular cast on, that first row could just be a little tricky because those stitches are not actually knit stitches. You know, a cast on is different from a regular knit stitch, so they don't really give quite as much as they do when you're knitting a row that has been knit, if that makes any sense. So now we have the tail and the working yarn both on the same side. They're both here at the top. So just make sure that when you're ready to knit the next row, you're holding on to the working yarn and not your tail. You're not knitting with your tail, okay? So now we're ready to go ahead and knit another row. So when you knit the next row, it's just the same thing that we did before. You're just going in the stitch, around, and popping it off the top. See how much easier it is? It's a more fluid motion because those stitches are just giving a little bit more than they did in that first. That first row is always a little bit awkward. All right, and I hope I'm not throwing you off by the way I hold the yarn with my left hand. That's called the Continental Method. So if you are throwing, if you're going like this, in, around, and off the top, it's still the same motion. It's just the fact that I hold my working yarn with my left hand and then I just kind of grab it with the right needle each time. You could try that if you want to, or you could just keep doing the method that you're comfortable using. What we're going to do is we're just going to keep knitting, just like what we were doing the past two rows. Keep knitting until you have 6 inches of fabric. And the fabric is going to be going in this direction, okay? So you're just going to keep knitting and grab a ruler, grab a tape measure so that you could keep checking to see when you get to 6 inches long. All right? It's as easy as that. Okay, now that I see a good chunk of fabric has been created, a big chunk of the garter stitch here, I'm going to go ahead and measure it. I'm going to show you how I measure it. So I'm using this measuring tape, and when I take a measurement, I usually include the needle. So far I have about 3¼ inches here, so I've got more knitting to do. But this is how you're measuring it, this way. Okay, I'm going to check to see if I'm getting close. It's starting to look a little bit more like a square. So I'm starting up here, and it looks like I'm very close to 5 inches, so just about 1¼ inches left. Okay, I think I'm heading to 6 inches. I'm finishing this row and I will measure just to make sure that I'm there. Okay, I'm going to set it down. Make sure that my stitches don't fall off my needle while I'm doing this. I love the way this orange looks. And ooh, I'm even a tiny bit beyond 6 inches. That's okay with me. Okay, now it's time for me to bind off. Binding off is making an edge here that is secure, that won't unravel. And it's getting your stitches off of your needle. So I'm going to knit 1, and then I'm going to knit 2 stitches onto my new needle. Now I take this tip, and I'm taking the first one and I'm pulling it over the second like that. I want to do it nice and loosely, so I'm not grabbing any tension here. I'm just letting it be very, very loose. Now I take the first one and I'm pulling it over the second like that. Now I knit another one, and I'm pulling it over. And just the trick is not losing that one stitch that has to stay on. You could even hold on to it if you want to with your thumb, so you don't lose it. I think I do that sometimes without thinking. So I can grab it. I can grab that stitch right here with my thumb, so that it'll be nice and secure and I won't lose it. So just remember to do this very loosely, because you want the edge to be kind of relaxed. You don't want it to be cinched up or like tighter than the rest of your knitting. So I'm binding off all 25. I think it was 25. And when you do this bind off, just makes this really pretty edge that almost looks like a braid. It's really nice and neat. Okay, now I'm getting to the last couple stitches. So this is the first one over the second, and I'm knitting one more, and I go the first one over the second like that. Then I'm just left with 1 stitch on my needle. So I always pull it out to kind of stretch it out like this. Now I've got a big loop. Now I'm going to cut kind of a decent sized tail, because remember we're going to use that for the seam. And then I'm taking a look. I'm going to put this through the loop like this to secure it. And I want that to be kind of as tight as possible. So I usually kind of cinch it down. Okay, Now we've got a nice clean bind off, a really nice edge. Now it is time for us to make a mitt out of it like this. So now it's time for us to take our square of garter stitch fabric and we're going to seam up the end at the edge right here. And we just want to do it in a way that is as invisible as possible. And we're going to leave a space for the thumb. I think we're gonna go, looks like I did about an inch right here, but you could go about an inch to 1.5 inches before we leave the thumb hole, and then we're gonna seam up the rest, okay? All right, so there are lots of ways that you could seam this. You could just go ahead and grab one of these nubs right here and just like stitch it together by grabbing these little bars. But I want to teach you a different way that I think makes a really pleasing seam. So what you're going to need is a tapestry needle that looks like this. And I want you to just kind of look at your knitting, see all these ridges. We've got these garter ridges going down. In between each ridge, if you poke around a little bit with your tapestry needle, are these little V's. You see that? And you could even just play around a little bit. You're not going to hurt anything. There's one. There's a V like that. You could just kind of poke through your knitting and see if you could just find those little V's that are in between those garter rows. Okay, they're hiding in between there, like that. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna grab a bunch of those V's as we go down the line, and we're going to seam the fabric by grabbing those V's. It's either it looks like this or it looks like that. Okay, so let's go ahead and give it a shot. So on this square, I've taken a little bit of contrasting yarn instead. You're gonna go ahead and use the yarn that, that you used for your actual glove so that it really is invisible. And let me go ahead and just put it through my tapestry needle like this. Oops. First I grabbed a little bit of fabric here at the end. And then I'm just moving my orange yarn out of the way, although that could stay inside. Now I'm just grabbing the edge right here as well. Now I'm just bringing it together. Okay, so I'm ready to go. So what I've done is I tacked down just the top part of this glove. Now I'm ready to, I see here is the bind off edge. Here's where I cast it on. So I kind of have it lined up so I'm ready to seam. So I'm gonna go right in this little area in between these garter ridges. Here's where I bound off and here's the first row of garter bumps. I'm just going in between and I'm kind of working my way. Oh, let's see if I can make sense of all this. There we go. Kind of working my way this way, down the glove. All right, now let's see, I'm gonna dig around in here. I don't want to get twisted up. So I go like that. Now I'm gonna go in between. There's another little set of V's. Now I'll go in between here and dig around a little bit. Okay, I'm just getting a little bit in between there. I'll go here, grab another. And maybe one more, like right around here. Okay. Okay, yours will be much more invisible because I've got some light yarn just so you can see where I'm going. Okay, that's probably enough fabric. Now I'm going to go ahead and gently pull it and see if it kind of closes up. Like that. Okay, that looks okay to me. Now I'm going to bring my yarn through the back like this. So I'm inside of my glove now. You can kind of see that this is where there's a little bit more of like a raised seam on the inside. So now I'm just going to make a little knot so this stays inside. I'm going to go through here and just give it a little tug. And maybe one more. Just putting it through the loop and making a little knot. Okay, so that I could go ahead and I can cut that off. And so far, I like the way that looks, like a pretty invisible seam. Now I'll go ahead and, remember, you're just using your tails, but I'm going to go in the bottom and just kind of tack that so it looks kind of even. I'll bring it this way. Okay, now I'm just ready to, here's that nice bind off area. I'm just gonna kind of dig around right here, and there's that little V. There's one side. Here's another side. There's those two little fingers. Okay, now I'm looking on this side. There they are. Maybe I'll just look to see if I skipped any. No, that looks okay. Now I'll look over here again. There they are, right there. Pretty sure that's the next one, so I'll grab those there. Then I'll dig around over here and look for another two. That looks good. Those little bars in between. There they are again, right there. And there they are. There's two little bars. And here, maybe right there. All right, I'm getting close to the end so that I have space for my thumb. I'll go in here. That looks good. Maybe I'll just go, I don't know. I'll go ahead and grab it there, but then I'll kind of just dive underneath like this with my, oh, actually I didn't close it up yet. All right, so I'm just gonna pull it. And when you pull it, if you hold on to the top, it should just all kind of come together and create this really nice invisible seam. That even though I have this contrasting color, even that is kind of invisible here, and I really like that. Okay, so that's good. So this is the outside of my glove, and the inside is where you see that little ridge. It looks more like a seam on the outside for me. Now I'm just plunging it inside, like that. I'm going to pull it inside out. Like this, and then I'm just kind of pulling it, putting it through a couple stitches and making a little knot like that to really secure that seam. There's another like that. Okay, and then I could just take this, which of course in your case would be the same color as your glove, and you could just kind of weave it in to some stitches like this. And remember, this is the inside, so it could look as messy. Nobody's going to see it. It could look messy on the inside. You might want to just make sure that when you go through these stitches, you're not going through anything that's going to show on the other side, but even if it did, you wouldn't really notice it because it's the same color as your glove. So I'm just going along the ridge that is like a seam on the inside. And usually at the end, I go back through the part that I just wove in because it seems to kind of lock it in like that. Maybe 2 or 3 stitches I go back in the same direction that I came, like that, and then just cut it off. And I'll weave in all the ends here and there because I have extra ends. Hopefully you used those to do your seaming. And I have a nice looking glove. I love it. I hope you found this tutorial helpful. And if you have any questions or anything is confusing to you, make sure that you send an email or call the shop and we will talk you through it. Any feedback that you have is really appreciated. If you have made a pair and you would like to share on social media, if you could tag Apricot Yarn and Supply and then we can see what you've made. We'd love to see what you've knit up. So thank you very much for watching. Have a good day.